A widowed father pulls over on a stormy night, only to find a stranger sobbing beneath the streetlight. He offers her shelter, thinking it's just an act of kindness. But the next morning, his world shatters. She isn't just anyone. She's one of the most powerful women in the country, a billionaire CEO on the run after betrayal, scandal, and secrets no one dares to speak of. Now, hiding in his farmhouse with his daughter, she begins to find something she never had before: family, love, and faith. But just as hope takes root, danger arrives at their doorstep. Reporters swarm, old enemies return, and one ruthless man is ready to destroy everything unless she walks away again. Will this broken CEO find redemption in the arms of a single dad and his daughter? Or will her past rip apart the only love she's ever known? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The rain hammered against the windshield of James Carter's old pickup truck as he drove down the dark country road. The rhythmic swish of the wipers barely kept up with the downpour, and his worn hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. His thoughts drifted to Emily, his 13-year-old daughter, probably curled up on the couch with her homework, waiting for him to come home. "Just a few more miles," he muttered to himself, glancing at the dashboard clock that read 9:45 p.m. The hardware store had needed extra help with a large delivery, and James couldn't say no. That wasn't his way. But he hated leaving Emily alone this late, even though she was responsible beyond her years. The truck's headlights cut through the sheets of rain, illuminating the empty road ahead. Dense woods lined both sides, their branches swaying in the wind. The familiar route home seemed different tonight, more imposing in the storm's fury. James leaned forward, squinting through the rain-streaked windshield. Something caught his eye ahead, a figure standing under one of the few street lamps that dotted this rural stretch. As he drew closer, the image became clearer. A woman in what looked like an expensive business suit, completely drenched, her shoulders shaking. His foot eased off the accelerator. Common sense told him to keep driving. Nothing good could come from stopping for strangers on a night like this. But something in her posture spoke of complete desperation, and James Carter had never been able to ignore someone in need. His late wife Mary had always said his kind heart would get him in trouble someday. The truck's brakes squealed softly as he pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. Through the passenger window, he could see her more clearly now. She was probably in her late 40s, her dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something refined about her. She clearly didn't belong on this country road. James rolled down his window just enough to speak. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman turned toward him, and the streetlight revealed tears mixing with the rain on her face. She seemed to struggle with whether to respond, taking a small step backward. "I'm James Carter," he said in his gentle, steady voice. "I live just a few miles from here. Can I help you somehow?" She hugged herself, shivering in the cold rain. I shouldn't be here," she managed to say, her voice barely audible above the storm. James reached into the back seat and grabbed his old work coat. Without hesitation, he stepped out into the rain, holding the coat in front of him like a peace offering. The cold water immediately soaked through his flannel shirt, but he barely noticed. "At least take this," he said, approaching slowly, careful not to frighten her. "You'll catch your death in this weather." The woman stared at the offered coat for a long moment, then reached out with trembling hands to take it. As she pulled it around her shoulders, James caught a glimpse of designer labels on her suit and an expensive watch on her wrist. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the coat tightly. Up close, he could see that her makeup had run, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. Her eyes held a deep pain that stirred something in his heart, the same look he'd seen in his own eyes in the mirror after Mary passed. "Let me drive you somewhere," he offered. "To a phone, or the police station if you need it." Thunder rolled overhead, emphasizing the urgency of the situation. She shook her head quickly at the mention of police. "No, no police, please." James nodded slowly, not pushing the issue. "Well, you can't stay out here. My truck's warm, and I promise you'll be safe. I've got a daughter waiting at home. I'd want someone to help her if she was ever in trouble." The mention of his daughter seemed to soften something in her expression. She looked at the truck, then back at the dark road, as if weighing her options. Finally, she gave a small nod. James opened the passenger door for her, then hurried back to the driver's side. As he climbed in, she was already buckling her seatbelt, his coat wrapped tightly around her like armor. "I'm Claire," she said quietly, staring straight ahead. "Just Claire." James turned up the heat and pointed the vents in her direction. "Nice to meet you, Claire." He didn't press for more information. Something told him she wasn't ready to give it. Instead, he pulled back onto the road, the truck's headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. They drove in silence for a few minutes, only the sound of rain and thunder filling the cab. James sneaked occasional glances at his passenger, noting how she held herself rigid, as if trying to maintain some last shred of dignity despite her circumstances. Claire's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. The gold watch on her wrist caught the light from the dashboard, probably worth more than his truck. But wealth meant little out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a storm. Out here, she was just another soul in need of help. "I've lost everything that matters," she whispered suddenly, so softly he almost missed it over the rain. Then she fell silent again, turning her face toward the window, clearly indicating she had no more to say. James nodded, accepting her words without comment. He knew about loss, knew how it could hollow you out, leave you standing alone in the rain with nowhere to go. Sometimes the best help wasn't words or questions, but simple presence. So he drove on through the storm, offering the only thing he could right now: shelter from the rain and a safe place to sit with her grief. The old truck rumbled down the country road, carrying them through the darkness toward his farmhouse, where Emily waited. James didn't know who this woman was or what had brought her to this point, but he knew that sometimes God put people in your path for a reason. For now, that would have to be enough. The porch light cast a warm glow through the rain as James's truck pulled into the gravel driveway of the weathered farmhouse. Through the window, he could see Emily's silhouette moving about in the kitchen. The mysterious woman, Claire, sat quietly beside him, her expensive suit still dripping onto the truck's worn fabric seats. "That's my daughter Emily inside," James said softly. "She's probably kept dinner warm for me." Claire nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. We've got plenty to share." James's voice was gentle but firm, the same tone he used when neighboring farmers were too proud to accept help during tough times. They hurried through the rain to the covered porch, where Emily had already thrown open the door. She stood there in her favorite oversized sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes wide with curiosity at their unexpected guest. "Dad? I was getting worried." Emily's gaze shifted to Claire, and her expression softened with immediate concern. "Oh my goodness, you're soaked through." "Emily," James said, helping Claire over the threshold. "This is Claire. I found her stuck in the storm." "Claire, my daughter Emily." "Hi," Claire managed, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. Her mascara had run slightly, leaving faint dark smudges under her eyes. Emily sprang into action with the natural warmth that always made James's heart swell with pride. "You must be freezing. Come on, I have some dry clothes you can borrow." She was already heading toward the stairs, gesturing for Claire to follow. Claire hesitated, looking at James. "Go on," he encouraged. "Emily's right. You need to get warm and dry. We'll have some hot food ready when you come down." Emily led Claire upstairs while James headed to the kitchen, where a pot of his late wife's signature beef stew was simmering on the stove. The familiar aroma filled the house with comfort, and he could hear Emily's gentle chatter floating down from above. 10 minutes later, Claire descended the stairs in Emily's spare sweatpants and an old college sweatshirt of James's that Emily must have offered. The expensive businesswoman was transformed into something more human, more vulnerable. Her dark hair was towel-dried and falling in waves around her shoulders, her face cleaned of running makeup. "The stew's hot," Emily announced, pulling out a chair at their worn oak table. "Dad makes it just like Mom used to." She froze for a moment, glancing at her father, but James just smiled softly and began ladling the stew into bowls. Claire sat where Emily indicated, her movements careful and contained. Thank you both. I don't know what to say. No need to say anything, James replied, setting a bowl in front of her. Eat while it's hot. They settled into their usual places. James and Emily's familiar routine now adjusted to include their quiet guest. Emily said grace, her young voice clear and sincere, as she added a special thanks for bringing Claire safely to their home. The only sounds for a while were the clink of spoons and the steady drum of rain on the roof. Claire ate small, measured spoonfuls, her shoulders gradually relaxing as warmth and food began to work their magic. Emily watched her with undisguised interest, while James focused on his bowl, giving their guest space. "Is it good?" Emily finally asked, breaking the silence. "Dad's stew always makes me feel better when I'm sad." Claire looked up, startled by the girl's perception. Yes, it's very good. Thank you. Are you okay?" Emily's voice was gentle, full of genuine concern. "You seem really sad." "Emily," James said quietly, but Claire shook her head. "It's all right," she assured him, though her voice wavered slightly. "I'm just having a difficult time right now. But your kindness means more than you know." James set his spoon down. "You'll stay the night, of course. The guest room is small, but it's warm and dry. We can figure out next steps in the morning." "I couldn't possibly," Claire began. "You can, and you will," James said firmly. "That storm's not letting up, and it's not safe to be out there tonight." Emily was already clearing the bowls. "I'll get fresh sheets for the guest room." She hurried upstairs, leaving the adults in momentary silence. "Your daughter is very special," Claire said softly. "She is," James agreed. "Has her mother's heart." Something in his tone must have told Claire not to pursue that topic. She simply nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. After Emily had made up the guest room and said her goodnights, James showed Claire upstairs. "Bathrooms across the hall. There are fresh towels under the sink. If you need anything, I'm at the end of the hallway." "Thank you, Mr. Carter." "James," he corrected gently, "get some rest." He turned to go, but her voice stopped him. "Why are you helping me? You don't know anything about me." James looked back at her, his expression thoughtful. "Because it's what decent folks do. And because everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're hurting." He closed the door softly behind him and headed toward his room. But halfway down the hall he heard it, muffled sobs coming from the guest room. The sound was heart-wrenching, the kind of crying that comes from deep places of pain and loss. James stood in the darkened hallway, his hand resting against the wall. Every instinct told him to help, to comfort, but he knew sometimes people needed to let their grief out in private. Whatever had brought this woman to his door, whatever she was running from, she clearly carried a heavy burden. He remained there for a long moment, torn between compassion and the nagging questions about who she really was and what trouble might have followed her to his doorstep. But for now, she was just someone who needed help, and that was enough. Morning sunlight streamed through the faded curtains of the guest room, warming Claire's face. The unfamiliar comfort of the quilted blanket and the soft cotton sheets felt worlds away from her usual silk bedding. For a moment, she lay still, trying to remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. The rain, the kind stranger, his welcoming daughter. A new sensation cut through her thoughts, the rich aroma of bacon wafting up from downstairs. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Claire sat up slowly, running her fingers through her tangled hair. Emily had lent her some old clothes, simple cotton pajamas, that felt strange against her skin, so different from her designer sleepwear. She found her way downstairs, following the sounds of quiet conversation and the clinking of plates. The farmhouse kitchen was bright and lived in, with sunlight pouring through wide windows that overlooked fields of swaying wheat. Emily stood at the stove, carefully flipping pancakes while James tended to the bacon, the two of them moving around each other in a well-practiced morning dance. "Good morning," Claire said softly, hovering in the doorway. Emily's face lit up. "You're awake. Dad made his famous bacon, and I'm in charge of pancakes. Do you like blueberries in yours? We picked them ourselves last summer." "That sounds wonderful," Claire replied, touched by the girl's enthusiasm. She hadn't experienced this kind of simple, genuine warmth in years. James pulled out a chair at the worn wooden table. "Have a seat. Coffee's fresh." He poured her a mug from an old percolator, the rich scent filling the air. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, savoring its earthy aroma. Emily proudly served up a stack of slightly misshapen pancakes, while James added strips of perfectly crispy bacon to their plates. The morning light caught the dust motes dancing in the air, giving the scene an almost dreamy quality. Claire couldn't remember the last time she'd sat down for a proper breakfast, let alone one made with such care. "The paper's here if you'd like to read it," James offered, reaching for the rolled-up newspaper on the counter. "Small town, but we still get the national news." Claire's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Thank you, but I'm fine." James unfolded the paper anyway, taking a sip of his coffee. His expression changed almost immediately, his eyes widening as they fixed on the front page. Claire watched, as recognition dawned on his face, followed by disbelief. He looked up at her, then back at the paper, then up at her again. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "Billionaire CEO Claire Whitmore missing amid corporate scandal." Below, it was a photo of her from last year's shareholders' meeting, wearing a tailored suit and her signature pearl necklace, looking every bit the powerful executive she'd been. James cleared his throat. "Claire," he said quietly, turning the paper so she could see it, "is there something you'd like to tell us?" Emily leaned over to look at the photo, pancake forgotten halfway to her mouth. "Oh my gosh," she gasped. "That's you." Claire's hands trembled around her coffee mug. The caring faces of these two strangers, who weren't quite strangers anymore, made her chest tighten. They'd shown her nothing but kindness, and they deserved the truth. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Claire Whitmore." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "Everything in that article. It's probably all bad, isn't it?" James scanned the text quickly. "Says here your board of directors accused you of, well, quite a few things, and that you disappeared 3 days ago." Claire set down her mug, afraid she might drop it. "The accusations aren't true," she said, her voice stronger now. "My board, people I trusted for years, they orchestrated this. They wanted control of the company, and She stopped, unable to continue, as the betrayal washed over her again. James folded the paper deliberately and set it aside. His expression remained calm, though his eyes were troubled. "That's why you were out there in the rain," Claire nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I couldn't stay, couldn't face it. 20 years of building something, of trying to do good, and they destroyed it all in a day. My reputation, my life's work. Even my fiancée was part of it." Her voice cracked on the last word. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the old clock on the wall. Emily's pancakes were getting cold, forgotten in the weight of the moment. "You're famous," Emily suddenly exclaimed, her young face filled with wonder rather than judgment. "I mean, you're in the actual newspaper and everything." Claire tried to smile at the girl's innocent observation, but she felt tears welling up instead. Famous. The word used to mean something different to her. Success, achievement, respect. Now it felt like a curse, a spotlight she couldn't escape. "Emily," James said gently, noticing Claire's distress, but his daughter was already moving around the table. "Are you crying? Don't cry," Emily said, impulsively wrapping her arms around Claire's shoulders. "Dad says when bad things happen, we just have to trust that God has a plan. Right, Dad?" The simple gesture of comfort from this child she barely knew broke something loose inside Claire. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, running down her cheeks as Emily hugged her tighter. Through her blur of tears, she saw James watching them, his face a mixture of concern and understanding. Here she sat, one of the most powerful women in the business world, crying over cooling pancakes in a farmhouse kitchen while a 13-year-old girl tried to comfort her. The absurdity of it all might have made her laugh if she wasn't so overwhelmed by the pure kindness of it. The kitchen was quiet except for the gentle clink of dishes and the soft splash of water in the sink. Claire stood beside Emily, drying each plate, the teenager handed her with careful precision. Her designer blouse, now wrinkled from sleep, looked oddly out of place next to Emily's worn jeans and simple t-shirt. James watched them from the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he struggled to reconcile the woman before him with the headlines he'd just read. The morning paper lay spread across the wooden surface, its bold letters screaming accusations about corporate corruption and betrayal. "You don't have to help with the dishes," James said softly. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she set down another plate. "Please," she whispered. "I need to do something normal." Emily shot her father a look, the kind that suggested he should stop talking, and handed Claire another dish. The simple rhythm of their teamwork seemed to calm the older woman. When the last fork was dried and put away, Claire's shoulders slumped. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "I suppose you want to know why I'm here." James pulled out a kitchen chair. "Only if you want to tell us." Claire sank into the offered seat, her usual poise crumbling like a sandcastle in the tide. Emily settled beside her, while James remained standing, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. "My entire board turned against me," Claire began, her voice barely above a whisper. "People I trusted, people I thought were friends." She smoothed invisible wrinkles from her skirt, a nervous gesture that spoke of years of maintaining control. "They spent months building a case against me, twisting every decision I'd made into something ugly." The morning sun cast long shadows across the kitchen floor as Claire continued. "The media. They're calling me the Ice Queen. They say I destroyed families to build my empire. That I care more about profit than people." Her laugh was hollow, empty of joy. "Maybe they're right. Somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I stopped seeing people and only saw numbers, deals, acquisitions." James moved to the coffee pot, refilling his cup and placing a fresh mug in front of Claire. The familiar aroma of dark roast filled the kitchen. "I woke up yesterday morning to find my own fiancé had orchestrated the whole thing. He'd been gathering evidence, recording conversations, building a case to force me out." Claire wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I ran. I just ran. Left everything behind. My phone, my credit cards, my identity." She looked up at James, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I don't even know who I am anymore." The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the silence that followed. Outside, a rooster crowed, and the distant lowing of cattle drifted through the open window. James pulled out another chair, its legs scraping against the linoleum floor. "I know something about losing yourself," he said quietly. "When Sarah, Emily's mother, got sick, everything changed overnight." Emily reached for her father's hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that spoke of shared grief and comfort. "The doctors gave her 6 months," James continued, his voice steady but tender. "She lasted 8. Every day, I watched the woman I loved slip away, and I felt completely powerless. My faith, my sense of purpose, everything I thought I knew about life seemed to crumble." Claire listened intently, her coffee forgotten. "After she passed, I was lost, angry. Had a 4-year-old daughter who needed me, but I could barely take care of myself." James squeezed Emily's hand. "Then one Sunday morning, Emily asked to go to church. Sarah always took her, you see. And sitting there in Sarah's usual pew, holding our daughter's hand, something broke open in me." He looked directly at Claire. "I realized that being lost isn't the same as being gone. Sometimes we need to lose our way to find a better path." "How?" Claire's voice cracked. "How did you keep going?" "Faith," James said simply. "Not just in God, but in the goodness of people, in the power of small kindnesses, in the strength that comes from serving others instead of yourself." He gestured around the modest kitchen. "This life isn't fancy, but it's real. It's built on love and community, not power and profit." Claire's carefully maintained composure began to crack. A single tear rolled down her cheek, then another. Emily, who had been quietly watching the exchange, suddenly moved. Without hesitation or self-consciousness, she wrapped her arms around Claire's shoulders. "You don't have to be alone," she whispered. The simple gesture of comfort, so pure, so unexpected, broke the last of Claire's defenses. Her body shook with silent sobs as years of buried emotion poured out. Emily held her tighter, and Claire clung to the girl like a lifeline. James watched as his daughter offered the kind of healing that no words could provide. Emily's face was pressed against Claire's shoulder, her own eyes wet with tears of empathy. The morning sun painted them in soft gold, a tableau of unexpected grace in his humble farmhouse kitchen. Claire's sobs gradually quieted, but Emily didn't let go. The teenager's unconditional acceptance seemed to create a safe harbor where Claire could finally let herself be truly seen, not as a CEO, not as the Ice Queen, but as a human being who had lost her way. The kitchen clock continued its steady rhythm, marking this moment of transformation. Outside, life on the farm continued, chickens clucking, wind rustling through the cornfields, the distant sound of a tractor. But in the warmth of the morning light, something profound had shifted. In the simple act of sharing their brokenness, healing had begun to take root. The afternoon sun had broken through the morning clouds, casting warm rays across the town's main street as James's pickup truck rumbled to a stop in front of Morton's General Store. Claire smoothed down Emily's borrowed t-shirt, far too small and young for her, while James killed the engine. "Morton's has everything," Emily announced from the middle seat, practically bouncing with excitement. "Well, maybe not everything like in the city, but Mrs. Morton always finds what you need." Claire managed a small smile, though her eyes darted nervously at the storefront windows. "I appreciate this, but maybe I should just—" "You need clothes that fit," James said simply, his voice kind but firm. "Can't wear Emily's things forever." The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The store smelled of fresh cotton and pine cleaner, with rows of practical clothing on one side and household goods on the other. Mrs. Morton, a plump woman in her 60s, looked up from her crossword puzzle at the counter. "James Carter. And Emily, sweetheart." Her warm greeting faltered slightly as she noticed Claire. "Oh, and this is our friend Claire," Emily said brightly, emphasizing friend with all the innocent conviction of youth. "She needs some clothes." Two elderly women by the sock display whispered behind their hands, eyes wide with recognition. Claire felt her shoulders tense, but James stepped slightly in front of her, as if shielding her from their stares. "Sarah," James nodded to Mrs. Morton, "Claire could use some basics. Maybe you could point us in the right direction?" Mrs. Morton's professional instincts kicked in. "Of course. Let's see what we can find." As they moved through the aisles, Claire noticed how people greeted James. Farmers in worn caps, young mothers with children, teenagers on break from the hardware store next door. Each interaction was marked by genuine respect and warmth. "Hey, Mr. Carter," a young man called out. "That fence post you helped me set last week is holding great. Thanks again." "Glad to hear it, Tommy," James replied with a modest nod. Claire selected a few simple items: jeans, cotton shirts, practical things she'd never worn in her corporate life. In the dressing room, she caught her reflection and barely recognized herself. Gone was the power suit and perfect makeup. The woman staring back looked real. "Everything okay in there?" Emily's voice came through the curtain. "Yes," Claire answered, surprised to find she meant it. "Just different." After paying, Claire insisted, though James tried to protest, they walked down Main Street toward the local diner. More whispers followed them, but they felt less threatening now, more curious than judgmental. The Bell Tower Diner was busy with the late lunch crowd. A waitress named Betty greeted James like an old friend, leading them to a corner booth beneath a faded photograph of the town's founding fathers. "Your usual, James?" Betty asked, pulling out her notepad. "Please. And Emily will have—" "A chocolate shake," Emily finished enthusiastically. Betty turned to Claire with a warm smile. "And for you, hon?" Before Claire could answer, Emily spoke up again. "This is our new friend Claire. She's staying with us for a while." The simple introduction, delivered with such natural affection, made Claire's throat tight. When was the last time someone had called her a friend without wanting something in return? "Just coffee, please," Claire managed. "And maybe a slice of whatever pie you'd recommend." "Apple," James and Emily said in unison, then shared a knowing look that made Claire's heart ache with its easy familiarity. As they ate, Claire watched the flow of life around them. Farmers discussed crop prices at the counter. A young couple shared a milkshake in the corner. The mayor stopped by their table to chat with James about an upcoming town council meeting. No one was checking stock prices on their phones. No one was making urgent business calls. No one was plotting corporate takeovers over power lunches. Betty brought their pie, generous slices of apple topped with vanilla ice cream slowly melting into the warm filling. Claire took a bite and closed her eyes. It tasted like childhood memories she'd forgotten she had. Good, right? Emily grinned, her own slice already half gone. Betty makes the best pies in 3 counties. It's wonderful, Claire agreed softly. As James paid the bill, insisting it was his turn, Claire noticed how Betty squeezed his arm and asked about Emily's upcoming school play. The gesture was so natural, so caring, it made her realize how long she'd lived without such simple human connections. The drive home was quiet, peaceful. Emily had dozed off between them, her head eventually settling on Claire's shoulder. The trust in that unconscious gesture nearly undid her. Fields of corn stretched out endlessly on either side of the road, golden in the late afternoon light. Claire watched them blur past, remembering how just yesterday she'd been surrounded by glass and steel skyscrapers, feeling trapped despite the view. "This feels different," she murmured, almost to herself. "Safe." James glanced at her but didn't respond, letting the truth of her words settle in the comfortable silence between them. The truck rolled on, carrying them back to the farmhouse that was already beginning to feel more like home than any penthouse ever had. The kitchen faucet dripped steadily, each drop echoing in the quiet farmhouse as evening settled over the countryside. James knelt under the sink, his weathered hands working with practiced ease as he adjusted the wrench. The warm glow from the overhead light cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. At the kitchen table, Emily sat hunched over her math homework, her forehead creased in concentration. Claire perched beside her, still wearing the simple blouse and jeans they'd bought that afternoon at Morton's. The clothes were a far cry from her usual designer suits, but somehow they felt right. "So, if x equals 12, Claire explained gently, pointing to the equation with her pencil. "What do you think happens next?" Emily chewed her bottom lip. We multiply both sides by 2? Exactly." Claire's face lit up. "You've got this, Emily. You're much better at algebra than you think." From his spot under the sink, James paused his work, listening to their interaction. The sound of their voices blending together, Emily's excited questions and Claire's patient answers, created a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. "Dad," Emily called out, "did you know Claire used to help teach math at a community center? She makes it so much easier to understand." James slid out from under the sink, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Is that so?" Claire ducked her head, suddenly shy. "It was a long time ago before." She trailed off, but then brightened. "Emily's a natural, though. She just needed someone to show her how the pieces fit together." "Like you're showing Dad how to fix that sink?" Emily giggled. "Hey now," James protested, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. "I'll have you know I've been fixing sinks since before you were born, young lady." "Is that why it's still dripping?" Claire asked innocently, her eyes twinkling. The look of mock outrage on James's face sent Emily into peals of laughter. Claire joined in, her genuine laugh filling the kitchen, musical and unrestrained. James couldn't help but chuckle too, shaking his head as he went back to work. "I haven't heard you laugh like that before," Emily said to Claire, her voice soft and wondering. Claire's laughter faded to a gentle smile. "I haven't had much reason to lately." She looked around the humble kitchen, taking in the hand-sewn curtains, the collection of Emily's artwork on the fridge, and the well-worn Bible on the counter. "Everything in my world has been so calculated. Meetings, contracts, appearances, I forgot what it feels like to just be." The dripping finally stopped as James emerged triumphant from under the sink. "Sometimes the simplest things are the hardest to find," he said, standing up and stretching his back. While Emily packed up her homework, Claire moved to the stove where an old kettle waited. "May I make some tea? I noticed you have chamomile." "Help yourself." James nodded. "Mugs are in the cabinet to your left." Claire went through the motions of preparing tea, her movements precise but relaxed. She seemed to find comfort in the ordinary task, James noticed. When she handed him a steaming mug, their fingers brushed briefly, and neither pulled away too quickly. They settled at the table, Emily between them, sharing comfortable silence as darkness gathered outside the windows. The kitchen clock ticked softly, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. "You know," Claire said finally, cradling her mug, "I used to think success meant having the corner office, the endless meetings, the power to make million-dollar decisions." She paused, looking at Emily's homework spread across the table, at James's calloused hands wrapped around his mug. "But this feels more real than anything in my world." James studied her face in the gentle kitchen light. Gone was the mask of the powerful CEO, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "Real doesn't always mean easy," he said quietly. "No," Claire agreed, "but at least it's honest." She reached over and helped Emily gather her scattered pencils. "In my world, everyone wants something from you. Here, you just are." Emily yawned, prompting James to check the time. "Homework all done?" "Thanks to Claire," Emily beamed, hugging her textbook. "Can she help me again tomorrow?" Before James could answer, headlights swept across the kitchen windows. A large black SUV crawled past the house, moving slowly down the country road. Claire went still, her fingers tightening around her mug until her knuckles turned white. James stood, moving to the window. The SUV had stopped at the end of their long driveway, its engine idling. Even in the growing darkness, he could make out its tinted windows and city plates. "Emily," he said calmly, though his shoulders had tensed, "why don't you head upstairs and get ready for bed?" Emily looked between the adults, sensing the shift in mood. "But, please, sweetheart," James said firmly. After Emily reluctantly trudged upstairs, James turned to Claire. She had set down her mug and was standing rigid, her face pale in the kitchen light. The peaceful moment from minutes before had shattered like fine china on concrete. "Could be nothing," James said, but his eyes never left the SUV. "Lots of city folks get lost out here." Claire shook her head. "They've found me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I knew they would, eventually. I thought I had more time." The SUV's headlights switched off, but the vehicle remained motionless at the end of the driveway, a dark sentinel in the gathering night. James moved away from the window, positioning himself between Claire and the door. His stance was protective, instinctive. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you're not alone anymore." Claire looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "James, I can't let you and Emily get caught up in this. My problems. They're bigger than—" "We'll figure it out," he cut her off gently but firmly. "Together." The word hung in the air between them as they watched the SUV through the kitchen window, both aware that the simple peace they'd found might be slipping away like sand through their fingers. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when sharp knocks rattled the farmhouse's front door. James was already up, dressed in his work clothes and sipping coffee at the kitchen counter. Claire sat across from him, warming her hands around her own mug, while Emily munched on toast and cereal. The pounding grew more insistent. Then came the voices. "Ms. Whitmore, Claire Whitmore, we know you're in there. Can you comment on the allegations of corporate fraud? What do you say to accusations from your board members?" Emily's spoon clattered against her bowl. Her eyes went wide with fear as she looked between her father and Claire. Claire's face had drained of color, her fingers trembling around her coffee mug. James moved swiftly, his protective instincts taking over. "Emily, honey, go upstairs to your room for a bit." His voice was calm, but firm. "But Dad—" "Now, sweetheart, please," Emily nodded, pushing back from the table. Claire touched her arm gently as she passed. "It'll be okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered. The shouting outside grew louder. Camera flashes sparked through the windows like lightning. James gestured for Claire to stay in the kitchen, out of sight. She nodded gratefully and stepped back into the shadows near the pantry. James squared his shoulders and strode to the front door. He opened it just enough to block the entrance with his solid frame, meeting the crowd of reporters with a stern gaze. At least 6 of them crowded his porch, microphones thrust forward, cameras clicking rapidly. "Mr. Carter, is Claire Whitmore staying here? What's your relationship with the CEO? Did she tell you about the missing funds?" James raised his hand, his expression hardening. The simple gesture somehow commanded attention, silencing the barrage of questions. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man used to being respected in his community. "This is private property," he said evenly. "You're trespassing and disturbing the peace. I'm asking you politely to leave." A female reporter in a sharp blue blazer pushed forward. "The public has a right to know." "The public," James cut in, "has no right to harass my family or anyone else on my land." His tone grew firmer. "I won't ask again. Please leave, or I'll call Sheriff Martinez." In the kitchen, Claire pressed her back against the cool wall, listening to James defend her. Her chest tightened with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. She could picture the headlines already. "Local farmer harbors. Fugitive CEO." She wrapped her arms around herself, remembering how peaceful yesterday had been, helping Emily with homework, laughing over dinner. Now she'd brought chaos to their doorstep. The reporters continued to press, their voices growing more aggressive. James remained unmoved, like an oak tree in a storm. "I mean it. Leave now, or I'm making that call." A few of the reporters began to back away, but the woman in the blazer persisted. "Mr. Carter, your community deserves to know if you're sheltering someone accused of—" "Martha Wilson." James's voice carried a note of disappointment. "I've known you since high school. Your daddy was my friend. Would he approve of you harassing your neighbors like this?" The reporter flushed, taking a step back. Something in James's words seemed to pierce through her professional armor, reminding her of the small-town values she'd grown up with. I'm just doing my job," she muttered, but her enthusiasm had deflated. "And I'm protecting my home," James replied firmly. "Good day." He closed the door with quiet finality, turning the lock with a solid click. Through the windows, they could see the reporters slowly dispersing, though a few cars remained parked along the road. Claire emerged from the kitchen, her arms still wrapped around herself. "James, I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid of." "Dad?" Emily called from upstairs. "Can I come down now?" "Yes, honey, they're leaving." Emily descended the stairs quickly, rushing to hug her father. She looked worriedly at Claire. "Are you okay?" Claire managed a weak smile, but her eyes were troubled. "I'm fine, sweetheart. But," she turned to James, "this isn't fair to either of you. Those reporters, they won't stop. They'll dig into your lives, make up stories, turn everything upside down." James shook his head. "We can handle a few nosy reporters." "You don't understand." Claire began pacing, her borrowed jeans swishing as she moved. "This is just the beginning. They'll camp outside, follow Emily to school, harass your neighbors. Everything I touch turns into this." She gestured toward the window where another camera flash went off. Emily stepped away from her father, reaching for Claire's hand. "But you're our friend now. We want to help." Claire squeezed Emily's hand, tears threatening to spill. "Oh, sweetie, you and your father have already helped me more than you know. That's why I can't let this circus hurt you." The day passed tensely. James called Emily's school to warn them about possible media attention. Claire stayed away from the windows, watching helplessly as more news vans arrived. By evening, the reporters had thinned out, but their presence lingered like storm clouds on the horizon. After dinner, when Emily had gone up to bed, Claire found James on the back porch. He sat in his usual chair, staring out at his fields painted purple by the sunset. She settled into the chair beside him, gathering her courage. "James," she said softly, "I should leave. Tonight, while it's dark, I can slip out the back way, call a cab from the next town over." "No." His response was immediate and firm. "Please, listen, you've been so kind, but I can't repay that kindness by destroying your peace. Emily deserves better than to be hounded by reporters. Your reputation in town—" "Claire." James turned to face her, his eyes serious in the fading light. "We don't turn away people in need." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet conviction, made Claire's throat tight with emotion. She understood then that this wasn't just about her, it was about who James was, about the values he lived by and taught his daughter. His kindness wasn't conditional on convenience. It was as much a part of him as breathing. The little white church stood nestled among tall maple trees, its weathered steeple reaching toward the cloudless morning sky. Claire sat in James's truck, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her borrowed sundress. Through the windshield, she watched families stream into the building, their Sunday best, catching the early light. "You okay?" James asked softly, turning off the engine. Claire managed a small nod. "It's been years since I've been to church." Emily hopped out of the back seat, her yellow dress swishing. "Don't worry, everyone's really nice here." She grabbed Claire's hand, tugging her gently. "Come on, I want you to meet my friends." Inside, wooden pews creaked beneath them as they settled into a row near the middle. Claire felt eyes on her, some curious, others uncertain. An elderly woman in front turned to smile warmly at them, while a few rows back, whispers floated through the air. The familiar strains of Amazing Grace filled the sanctuary, and Claire found herself surrounded by voices lifted in song. Emily's clear soprano rang out beside her, while James's deeper tones rumbled on her other side. Claire's own voice emerged hesitantly at first, then, stronger, remembering words she hadn't sung since childhood. Pastor Daniel stepped up to the pulpit, his kind eyes scanning the congregation. "Today," he began, "we're talking about new beginnings." His gaze settled briefly on Claire. "About how God's grace finds us in our darkest moments, when we think we've lost our way." Claire's throat tightened. She felt James shift slightly closer, his steady presence anchoring her. "Sometimes," Pastor Daniel continued, "we build walls around our hearts. We think success means never showing weakness, never admitting we're lost. But God sends us messages in unexpected ways, through strangers who become friends, through simple acts of kindness that remind us who we really are." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes. Emily slipped her small hand into Claire's and squeezed. "The journey to forgiveness isn't easy," the pastor said, his voice gentle but firm. "First, we must forgive ourselves. We must believe we're worthy of second chances, worthy of love and redemption." By the sermon's end, Claire felt raw, but somehow lighter, as if a burden she'd carried for years had begun to crack and crumble. During the fellowship hour after service, several church members approached them. Mrs. Cy Henderson, who taught Emily's Sunday school class, pressed a slice of homemade apple pie into Claire's hands. "Everyone needs something sweet when they're finding their feet," she said with a wink. Others were more reserved, offering polite nods while keeping their distance. Claire, overhead snippets of conversation. That CEO from the news. And James Carter, taking in a stranger. As they stepped out into the sunlight, Emily was chattering about the youth group's upcoming bake sale. "Maybe you could help us, Claire. You said you used to bake with your grandmother, right?" A sharp click and flash cut through the moment. "Ms. Whitmore, over here." A man with a camera emerged from behind a parked car, rapid-fire shots capturing their startled expressions. Claire instinctively turned away, but the damage was done. "Is it true you're hiding from corporate investigators?" The reporter advanced, notepad in hand. "How long have you been staying with Mr. Carter? Are you two romantically involved?" James stepped forward, his jaw set. "This is church property. You're not welcome here." More clicks of the camera. Emily pressed close to Claire's side, fear and confusion clear on her young face. "The public has a right to know," the reporter called out as other church members began to gather. "The mighty Claire Whitmore living with a small-town farmer? It's quite a story." Pastor Daniel appeared, his usually gentle demeanor stern. "Sir, you're disturbing our congregation. I'll have to ask you to leave." But the reporter was already backing away, grinning as he checked his camera screen. "Got what I need anyway. Thanks for the exclusive." The drive home was quiet. Claire stared out the window, watching the familiar fields roll by, fields that had begun to feel like home. Now they felt exposed, vulnerable. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." James's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Don't apologize. You're not responsible for his actions. But I am responsible for bringing this chaos into your lives." Claire turned to look at Emily in the back seat, who was unusually silent. "Into your daughter's life. We knew who you were," James said firmly. "We chose to help. That's what matters. By evening, the photos were everywhere. Social media exploded with speculation. Local news vans parked at the end of their driveway. James had to close all the curtains against the occasional flash of cameras in the growing darkness. Claire sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through headlines on her phone. Billionaire CEO's small-town hideout. Claire Whitmore found. Living with widowed farmer. Corporate queen trades penthouse for farmhouse. James placed a cup of tea in front of her and gently took the phone from her hands. This doesn't change anything. Doesn't it? Claire looked up at him, her eyes pained. Your whole lives will be under a microscope now. Everyone will be watching, judging, making assumptions. Emily won't be able to just be a normal kid anymore. From the living room, they could hear Emily on the phone with her best friend, trying to explain why there were news vans outside her house. James pulled out a chair and sat beside Claire. Listen to me. When Sarah, Emily's mother, was sick, everyone in town had an opinion about how I should handle it. Whether I should try experimental treatments, whether I should send Emily to stay with relatives. But I learned something important then. The only opinions that matter are the ones that come from people who truly care about you. The whole world is going to be watching now, Claire whispered. Let them watch, James said simply. They'll see what we already know, that you're more than those headlines. That sometimes the best things in life happen when we stop running and start trusting. A camera flash lit up the kitchen window, making them both jump. James stood to close the blinds, his expression troubled despite his brave words. He knew their quiet life had changed. The sanctuary they'd created for Claire was now exposed to the world's harsh judgment. The question hung unspoken in the air. Could their growing bond survive under such intense scrutiny? Could they protect what mattered most while helping Claire find her way back to herself? The morning sun had barely risen when the first news van pulled up outside the farmhouse. James stood at the kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, watching as more vehicles lined the quiet country road. Reporters clutched notepads and microphones, while photographers aimed their long lenses at the house like hunters tracking prey. Emily peered through the curtains beside her father. Dad, there are so many people out there. James set his cup down and pulled his daughter close. I know, sweetheart. You're staying home from school today. I already called Principal Matthews. Claire appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with worry. She wore one of the simple outfits they'd bought in town, jeans and a blue cotton blouse that made her look more like a local than a CEO. Her shoulders sagged as she took in the scene outside. I'm so sorry, she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. This is all my fault. I never meant to bring this chaos into your lives. The sound of car doors slamming made them all jump. Through the window they could see Mrs. Peterson from next door marching up the driveway, followed by several other neighbors. Some carried casseroles, others looked concerned or curious. Good Lord, James muttered. Words gotten around fast. The doorbell rang, making Claire flinch. James squared his shoulders and headed for the front door, but Emily beat him to it. Emily, wait, Claire called out anxiously, but Emily had already opened the door, greeting their neighbors with her usual bright smile. Hi, Mrs. Peterson. Hi, Mr. Roberts. Mrs. Peterson, a plump woman in her 60s, clutched a covered dish. James Carter, what in heaven's name is going on? The whole town's talking, and there are news people everywhere. She peered past Emily, her eyes widening when she spotted Claire. James stepped forward, his calm presence filling the doorway. Folks, I know you're concerned, but this isn't the time for... Is it true? Mr. Roberts interrupted. That's Claire Whitmore staying here? The billionaire? Claire felt her chest tighten. She wanted to disappear, to run upstairs and hide. But Emily's next words stopped her. Yes, that's Claire, Emily said proudly. She's our friend, and she needs our help. The simple declaration hung in the air. Claire felt tears prick her eyes as Emily walked back to her and took her hand. We'll face it together, Emily said firmly, squeezing Claire's fingers. That's what families do. Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. Well, I brought my famous chicken casserole. Thought you might need some help feeding all these extra mouths. She thrust the dish at James. More neighbors pressed forward with food and questions, their voices a mixture of concern and curiosity. James thanked them but firmly insisted they needed privacy. As he closed the door, the sound of camera shutters clicked rapidly from the street. Claire sank onto the living room couch, her head in her hands. "I should go. I can't ask you both to deal with this circus." "You're not asking," James said quietly. He sat beside her, the couch cushions dipping under his weight. "We're offering." Emily perched on the coffee table across from them. "Dad's right. Running away won't fix anything." James leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Claire, maybe this attention isn't entirely bad." She looked up at him, confused. "How can this possibly be good?" "These reporters want a story," he said. "Right now they're writing whatever they want about you. But you have the truth on your side. Maybe it's time to let people see who you really are. Not the cold CEO they think they know, but the woman who helps Emily with her homework and offers to wash dishes after dinner." Claire wiped her eyes. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," James acknowledged. "But it's right. You can't change what your board did to you, but you can show the world your true character." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, like when Tommy Bradley spread rumors about me at school. Dad said the best way to prove him wrong was to keep being myself and let people see the truth." Claire looked between them. This father and daughter who had taken her in without question, who saw past her wealth and reputation to her heart. The weight of running, of hiding, suddenly felt heavier than facing what lay ahead. Standing up, Claire walked to the window. Camera flashes greeted her movement, but she didn't flinch this time. Instead, she watched a young reporter talking into her microphone, probably spinning tales about the mysterious billionaire hiding in farm country. "You're right," Claire said finally, turning back to James and Emily. "I've been running away when I should have been standing my ground." She took a deep breath. "It's time to face the truth, all of it, even the parts that hurt." James stood and joined her at the window. "You won't face it alone, promise?" Claire whispered, her voice small but hopeful. Emily bounced up and hugged them both. "Promise! We're in this together!" Outside, more cars arrived, more cameras pointed their way. But inside the farmhouse, Claire felt something she hadn't experienced since the betrayal at her company. Strength. Not the kind that came from power or money, but the kind that grew from being truly seen and supported. She squared her shoulders, finally ready to stop running. Claire stood in the muddy farmyard, her borrowed rubber boots sinking slightly into the soft earth as she stared at the chicken coop with determination. James had insisted she didn't need to help with the morning chores, but she'd been equally insistent. If she was going to stay here, she wanted to contribute. "Just scatter the feed in a wide arc," James explained, demonstrating with a practiced sweep of his arm. The chickens immediately flocked to the falling kernels, pecking enthusiastically. Claire mimicked his movement, but the feed flew everywhere, mostly landing on her own feet. A few chickens wandered over, looking at her questioningly. "Oh dear," she muttered, trying again. This time, she overthrew, and the feed scattered against the coop wall. James chuckled warmly. "Here, let me show you." He stepped behind her, gently guiding her arm through the proper motion. Claire felt her cheeks warm at his nearness, but she focused on the task. Her next throw was better, and the chickens rushed over excitedly. "I did it!" she exclaimed, surprised by her own childlike enthusiasm. James's eyes crinkled with amusement at her celebration of such a simple achievement. Later that morning, they moved on to fence mending. Claire held the wooden post steady while James hammered, her designer manicure already chipped and dirt under her nails. She didn't mind. It felt honest, real. "The trick is keeping it straight," James explained, pausing to wipe his brow. "Otherwise, the whole fence line goes crooked." "Like running a company," Claire mused. "One wrong decision affects everything downstream." Her voice caught slightly, remembering her board's betrayal, but the physical work helped push those thoughts away. When Claire accidentally knocked over the toolbox, sending nails scattering across the grass, she burst into unexpected laughter. "I'm absolutely terrible at this." James joined in her laughter. "You should have seen me when I first started farming. I nearly drove the tractor into the pond." By midday, they returned to the house, where Emily was setting up bowls and ingredients on the kitchen counter. "I thought we could bake cookies," she announced brightly. "Dad says you've probably never made them from scratch." Claire smoothed her messy hair self-consciously. "Is it that obvious?" "Don't worry," Emily grinned. "I'm a good teacher. First, we cream the butter and sugar together." Claire watched in fascination as Emily demonstrated with the mixer. When it was her turn, she turned it on too high, sending a puff of flour into the air. It settled in her hair like snow, and Emily giggled. "You look like a ghost." The teenager's laughter was infectious, and soon Claire was laughing too, really laughing, the kind that came from deep in her belly and made her sides hurt. James leaned against the doorframe, watching them with soft eyes. "You two are making quite a mess." "The best cookies require a messy kitchen," Emily declared with authority. "That's what Mom always said." She froze for a moment, glancing anxiously at her father, but James just smiled gently. "She was right about that," he agreed quietly. They worked together, Claire following Emily's patient instructions. Soon, the kitchen filled with the warm, sweet smell of baking cookies. When the timer dinged, Emily helped Claire slide the first batch out of the oven. "They're perfect," Emily exclaimed, examining the golden brown edges. "You're a natural." Claire felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the hot oven. She watched Emily arrange the cookies on a cooling rack with precise care, saw how James looked at his daughter with such pride and love. The scene was so domestic, so different from her life of board meetings and shareholder reports. After dinner, while Emily worked on homework, Claire stepped out onto the back porch. The reporters had finally left for the day, leaving the farmhouse in peaceful silence. Above her, the sky stretched endlessly, scattered with stars that were never visible in the city. She wrapped her arms around herself, breathing in the cool evening air. Her designer clothes were packed away, replaced by borrowed jeans and soft flannel. Her perfectly styled hair was messy from the day's work. Her hands were slightly rough from the fence mending. And yet, she felt more herself than she had in years. The screen door creaked, and James stepped out, offering her a mug of tea. She accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping into her hands. "Thank you," she said softly. "For today. For everything." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. They stood in comfortable silence, looking out at the starlit fields. Claire thought about the way Emily had hugged her after the cookies were done, flour still on both their faces. She thought about James's patient teaching, his quiet strength, the way he made space for her in their lives without demanding anything in return. The night was peaceful, broken only by the gentle chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Claire lifted her face to the star-filled sky, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I could belong here." The county fairgrounds buzzed with life as James pulled his old pickup truck into the dusty parking lot. Colored lights from the rides twinkled against the darkening sky, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of popcorn, cotton candy, and grilled corn on the cob. Claire stepped out of the truck, her eyes wide with wonder. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been to a fair, probably not since she was Emily's age. The teenager bounced excitedly beside her, already pointing out all the rides and attractions she wanted to try. "Look at the Ferris wheel," Emily exclaimed. "And they have a carousel, and, oh, can we get cotton candy, Dad, please?" James chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "One thing at a time, sweetheart." He turned to Claire. "Hope you didn't wear your fancy shoes tonight." Claire glanced down at her borrowed sneakers and jeans, a far cry from her usual designer wardrobe. "I think I'm properly dressed for the occasion," she said with a smile. They made their way through the entrance, where cheerful teenage volunteers stamped their hands with purple ink. The fairground was a maze of colorful booths and attractions, filled with families enjoying the warm evening. Children darted between game stalls, clutching stuffed animals and sticky treats. "I've never seen cotton candy being made before," Claire admitted as they stopped at a vendor's stall. She watched, fascinated, as the operator swirled a paper cone in the machine, transforming simple sugar into a fluffy pink cloud. Emily grabbed her hand. "You have to try it. It melts right in your mouth." Claire took a tentative bite of the spun sugar, laughing as it dissolved instantly. "This is amazing!" she exclaimed, surprised by her own childlike delight. They wandered through the fair, trying different treats and playing games. James proved particularly skilled at the ring toss, winning Emily a small stuffed penguin. When he handed Claire a tiny plush puppy he'd won at the baseball throw, her heart fluttered unexpectedly. "Want to try the Ferris wheel?" James asked after they'd explored most of the ground-level attractions. "Best view of the fairgrounds from up there." Emily spotted some school friends by the carousel. "Can I go ride with Sarah and Katie, please?" James hesitated, then nodded. "Stay where we can see you, and meet us by the popcorn stand in 30 minutes. As they stood in line for the Ferris wheel, Claire felt oddly nervous. The evening had been so perfect, simple and joyful in a way her life hadn't been for years. James seemed to sense her mood shift. "You okay?" he asked softly. "More than okay," she replied. "It's just, I forgot what it felt like to just enjoy life like this. No pressure, no expectations." The operator helped them into their seat, lowering the safety bar. As they began to rise, Claire gripped the bar tightly. James smiled. "Not a fan of heights?" "Heights I can handle," she said. "I worked on the 40th floor. It's the swaying that's new." They rose higher, the fair spreading out below them in a tapestry of lights and movement. When they reached the top, the wheel paused, giving them a panoramic view of the countryside beyond. "After Sarah died," James said quietly, "I couldn't bring myself to come to the fair for 2 years. It was our thing, you know. We'd come every summer, let Emily ride everything twice. The first time I came back without her." He trailed off, looking into the distance. Claire felt the weight of his words. "How did you find the strength?" "Emily," he said simply. "She needed normal moments, happy memories. So I learned to find joy again, even when it hurt. What about you? When did you last let yourself just be happy?" Claire thought about it. "I can't remember," she admitted. "I was so focused on building the company, proving myself. Somewhere along the way, I forgot how to enjoy the small things. And now?" She turned to look at him, this kind man who had opened his home and heart to a stranger. "Now, I'm learning again." The wheel began moving, bringing them back down to earth. As they descended, the first firework exploded overhead, painting the sky in brilliant gold. More followed, creating a dazzling display of color and light. Claire felt James's hand resting on the safety bar next to hers. Without overthinking it, she moved her fingers until they touched his. After a moment's hesitation, she slipped her hand into his warm grip as another burst of fireworks illuminated their faces. Their eyes met in the flickering light, and Claire felt something shift between them, something as delicate and promising as the summer night air. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of River Creek's town hall, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Claire stood behind the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down her simple blue dress, so different from her usual power suits. James and Emily flanked her sides, their steady presence giving her strength. The small hall was packed. Local townspeople filled the wooden chairs, while reporters from major networks crammed the aisles with their cameras and microphones. The familiar faces of her neighbors, the grocery store owner who'd given her fresh vegetables, the librarian who'd recommended books to Emily, helped calm her racing heart. Claire took a deep breath and looked down at her handwritten notes. Not typed, not prepared by a PR team, just her truth, written in her own hand the night before at James's kitchen table. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "For those who don't know me, I'm Claire Whitmore. 3 weeks ago, I ran away from my life as CEO of Whitmore Industries. The media called it a disappearance. The truth is, I was running from myself." A hushed silence fell over the room. Emily squeezed her hand encouragingly. "I built my company from nothing, and somewhere along the way I lost sight of what matters. I became focused on profits over people, on power over purpose." Claire's voice cracked slightly. "I justified every hard decision as necessary for success until I couldn't recognize myself anymore." Camera shutters clicked rapidly. James stood tall beside her, his quiet strength radiating through his gentle touch on her shoulder. "But that's not why I'm here today," Claire continued, straightening her spine. I'm here because while I was hiding, I discovered something far worse happening at Whitmore Industries. My board of directors, led by Marcus Reynolds, has been systematically embezzling funds from our charitable foundation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters began scribbling furiously. I have documentation. Claire held up a thick folder. Bank transfers, altered records, proof of kickbacks. They didn't just betray me, they betrayed every employee, every shareholder, and most importantly, every child our foundation was meant to help. She laid out the evidence, methodically explaining the complex fraud in simple terms. The reporters leaned forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock as she revealed document after document. When I confronted them, they threatened to destroy my reputation, and they did, because I let them. I ran instead of fighting. Claire's voice grew stronger. But living here in River Creek, among people of real integrity, has taught me something important. True strength isn't about power or control. It's about having the courage to face your mistakes and make things right. James smiled proudly, and Emily beamed beside her. So today, I'm announcing my immediate resignation as CEO of Whitmore Industries. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. But I'm not walking away. I'm turning over all evidence of corruption to the proper authorities, and I'm donating my controlling shares to establish an independent charitable trust. The foundation will be restructured to focus entirely on supporting rural communities and providing educational opportunities for underprivileged children. The local pastor stood up, starting a wave of applause that spread through the room. Claire saw tears in some of the townspeople's eyes. People who had welcomed her despite her past, who had shown her what community really meant. I came to River Creek, broken and lost. Claire's voice softened with emotion. But this town, and especially this family beside me, showed me that second chances are possible when you lead with truth and love. The applause grew louder. Reporters shouted questions. But Claire held up her hand. One last thing, she said. To anyone who's lost their way, like I did, it's never too late to change. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. The room erupted in a standing ovation. Local folks who knew her now as just Claire, the woman who helped at the church food pantry and taught Emily to make pancakes, stood cheering alongside hardened reporters who were already rewriting their headlines. Mayor Thompson stepped forward to shake her hand, cameras flashing as he declared, "River Creek is proud to call Claire Whitmore one of our own." Emily hugged her tightly, whispering, "You were amazing." The teenager's eyes shone with admiration. After answering questions from the press, Claire finally stepped away from the podium. Her legs felt weak with relief, but James's strong arm steadied her as they walked toward the side exit. The weight of secrets and shame had lifted from her shoulders. In the quiet hallway, away from the cameras and crowd, Claire turned to James. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like they belonged together. Tears of joy spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I've never felt this free." The farmhouse kitchen glowed with warmth as the sun began to set, casting golden light through the worn checkered curtains. The smell of fresh-baked chicken pot pie filled the air, Emily's favorite comfort food that James had prepared to celebrate Claire's brave press conference. Steam rose from the flaky crust as James set it in the center of the well-loved oak table. "This looks amazing," Claire said, her eyes bright with genuine appreciation. She'd changed from her press conference outfit into borrowed jeans and one of James's old flannel shirts rolled up at the sleeves. The outfit should have looked out of place on a billionaire CEO, but somehow it suited her perfectly. Emily bounced in her chair, grinning as she watched her father and Claire exchange gentle smiles. "You two are being so cute right now," she teased, causing both adults to blush. "Dad hasn't smiled this much since, well, in forever." "Emily," James warned softly, though his eyes crinkled with amusement. "What?" "It's true," Emily persisted, serving herself a generous portion of pot pie. "And Claire, you look way happier than when you first got here. Way less scary, CEO-like." Claire laughed, a free, genuine sound that filled the kitchen. "I'll take that as a compliment," she said, reaching over to squeeze Emily's hand. "Though I hope I wasn't too scary before." "Nah," Emily said through a mouthful of food. "Just sad. But now you're different. Good different." James watched the exchange, his heart swelling at how natural it felt. The three of them sharing dinner, teasing and laughing. The weight of the day's events, the press conference, and all the uncertainty seemed to melt away in the simple joy of being together. After dinner, Emily insisted on handling the dishes herself. "You two should rest," she declared with authority that made her sound just like her mother. "It's been a big day." James clicked on the old radio that sat on the windowsill, letting soft country music fill the living room. Willie Nelson's gentle voice crooned about blue skies and sunshine. Without thinking too much about it, he held out his hand to Claire. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Claire's eyes widened slightly, but she slipped her hand into his without hesitation. "I should warn you," she whispered as he drew her close. "I'm much better at boardroom negotiations than dancing." "That makes two of us," James chuckled, leading her in a simple slow dance. Her head rested naturally against his shoulder, and he could smell the light floral scent of her borrowed shampoo. "Though I used to practice with Emily standing on my feet when she was little." They swayed together in the fading daylight, the music wrapping around them like a comfortable blanket. From the kitchen, they could hear Emily humming along as she washed dishes, deliberately taking her time to give them space. "I never thought I'd be here," Claire murmured against his shoulder. "Dancing in a farmhouse kitchen with a man who saw me at my lowest, and still treated me with kindness." James's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as storms." He thought about that rainy night he'd found her, how close he'd come to driving past. "I'm glad you found your way here." Claire lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "So am I," she whispered. The music played on, but they'd stopped dancing, standing still in the middle of the living room. James reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. For years after losing his wife, he'd kept his heart carefully guarded, focused solely on raising Emily. But now, looking into Claire's eyes, he felt something he thought he'd never experience again. The flutter of possibility, the warmth of new love taking root. Claire's hand came up to rest against his chest, right over his heart. The gesture was so tender, so trusting, it took his breath away. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, James leaned down. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise and hope. It held all the gentle understanding of two people who had known loss and found unexpected joy in each other. When they parted, Claire's smile was radiant, matching the warmth James felt spreading through his chest. From the kitchen doorway came a poorly suppressed squeal of delight. They turned to find Emily watching them, her hands clasped over her mouth, eyes dancing with joy. She didn't even try to pretend she hadn't been spying. "I knew it," she exclaimed, bouncing on her toes. "I just knew it." James laughed, keeping one arm around Claire's waist. "Weren't you supposed to be doing dishes, young lady?" "The dishes can wait," Emily declared. "This is way more important." Claire opened her free arm, and Emily ran to join their embrace. They stood there, the three of them, holding each other as the last rays of sunlight painted the room in shades of gold and pink, Willie Nelson still singing softly about love and second chances. The morning sun had barely risen over the farmhouse when the crunch of tires on gravel shattered the peaceful dawn. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up, looking utterly out of place against the weathered barn and rustic surroundings. Claire, who had been helping Emily pack her school lunch in the kitchen, froze at the sound. Her face went pale as she recognized the distinctive engine purr. "No," she whispered, her hands trembling as she set down the sandwich she'd been wrapping. "Not here." James looked up from his coffee, immediately alert at the change in her voice. "Claire, what is it?" Before she could answer, car doors slammed outside. Through the kitchen window, they watched as Richard Hale emerged from the driver's seat, his expensive suit crisp despite the early hour. Two men in equally sharp attire followed, carrying leather briefcases. Emily peered around Claire. "Who are those men?" "Someone I hope never to see again," Claire said, her voice tight. She straightened her shoulders, trying to hide her fear. "Emily, sweetheart, could you please go upstairs?" James stood, protective instinct kicking in. "I'll handle this." "No," Claire touched his arm. "This is my battle. But please, stay close." The knock at the door was sharp and demanding. Claire opened it, chin raised, despite her racing heart. Richard's familiar cologne washed over her, once comforting, now sickening. "Hello, darling." Richard's smile was razor-sharp. "Quite the charming little hideaway you've found." "What do you want, Richard?" Claire's voice was ice. He brushed past her into the house, his expensive shoes clicking on the worn hardwood. His eyes swept the modest furnishings with barely concealed disdain. Can't an concerned ex-fiancé check on his beloved's welfare? That press conference yesterday was quite illuminating. James stepped forward, his solid presence reassuring. "You weren't invited here." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "James Carter, isn't it? The farmer who's been harboring our wayward CEO?" He gestured to his lawyers. "Perhaps we should all sit down. This concerns you too." Claire's stomach clenched as they gathered in the living room. Emily watched from the top of the stairs, despite being told to stay in her room. The lawyers spread documents across the coffee table like dealers at a corrupt card game. "Let's cut to the chase," Richard said, examining his manicured nails. "That little truth-telling spectacle yesterday? It stops now. You'll sign these papers surrendering all remaining claims to the company, and this unfortunate chapter can end quietly." "And if I refuse?" Claire's voice was steady, but her hands were clasped tight in her lap. Richard's smile turned predatory. "Then things get messy. For everyone." His gaze shifted to James. "Did you know, Mr. Carter, that harboring a CEO who's under investigation could be seen as conspiracy? The media would have a field day with that. Small-town farmer, single father, such a tragic story." James started to speak, but Richard continued smoothly. "And your daughter, Emily, isn't it? Sweet girl. 13's such a vulnerable age. It would be shame to see her privacy invaded by reporters digging into every detail of her life." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. James's hands clenched into fists. "You leave them out of this," Claire said, her voice shaking. "They have nothing to do with it." "On the contrary." Richard leaned forward. "You made them part of this the moment you involved them in your little redemption story. Sign the papers, Claire. Walk away. Or I'll make sure your farmer friend here faces every legal consequence possible for helping you hide. I'll ensure his daughter's face is splashed across every tabloid in the country." The room fell silent, except for the tick of the old wall clock. Claire looked at James, saw the quiet strength in his eyes, the willingness to stand with her. But then she glanced up at Emily on the stairs, innocent and vulnerable, and her heart shattered. "I'll sign," she whispered. "Claire, no." James stepped toward her. "We can fight this." She stood, hands trembling as she reached for the pen. "I won't let him hurt you. Either of you." Richard's triumph filled the room like poison gas as Claire signed paper after paper, each signature feeling like a knife in her heart. When it was done, he gathered the documents with a flourish. "Wise choice, darling. Always knew you'd see reason." He headed for the door, lawyers in tow. "I'll let myself out. You probably have some goodbyes to say." After they left, Claire stood woodenly in the middle of the room. James reached for her, but she stepped back. "I have to go," she said, voice hollow. "I have to leave. Now." "Claire, wait," James pleaded. "We can figure this out together. Don't let him win like this." She was already heading upstairs, grabbing her few belongings. Emily appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't go. We can help." Claire's heart twisted as she knelt before the girl who had become so dear to her. "I'm protecting you, sweetheart. Both of you. It's the only way." James followed her onto the porch as she headed for her car. "Claire, please don't do this. We're stronger together." She couldn't look at him, knowing she'd break if she saw the pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The car door closed like a final punctuation mark. As she drove away, Claire watched James and Emily grow smaller in her rearview mirror, their figures blurred by her tears. She had found heaven in their simple farmhouse, only to have it ripped away by the hell of her past. The farmhouse stood silent in the pale morning light, dew glistening on the grass like scattered diamonds. Claire moved through the kitchen with careful steps, her designer heels clutched in one hand to keep quiet. She'd changed back into her business suit, the one James had found her in, now cleaned and pressed. The familiar fabric felt like armor, but it couldn't protect her heart from breaking. Her fingers trembled as she placed the handwritten note on the worn kitchen table. The paper was torn from Emily's math notebook, the blue lines now filled with her hurried writing. "I love you too much to ruin you." She touched the words gently, a tear splashing onto the page. The kitchen held so many memories now. Emily teaching her to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, James's patient smile as she learned to work the ancient coffee maker, family dinners filled with laughter and belonging. Her gaze drifted to the refrigerator, where Emily had proudly displayed their first attempt at baking cookies together, the photo held by a magnet shaped like a chicken. Claire's throat tightened as she looked at their sleeping faces in the photo. Sweet Emily, who had welcomed her without question. Strong, gentle James, who had shown her what real love looked like. They deserved better than the storm she'd brought to their door. Richard's threats echoed in her mind. He would drag James through endless lawsuits, expose Emily to media harassment, destroy their peaceful life, unless Claire walked away. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. She crept up the stairs one last time, pausing outside Emily's room. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear the girl's soft breathing. Claire's heart clenched as she remembered their late-night talks, the way Emily would curl up beside her on the porch swing, sharing dreams and silly jokes. Outside James's room, she pressed her palm flat against the door. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though he couldn't hear. "Thank you for showing me what real love feels like." The morning air bit cold against her tear-stained cheeks as she stepped onto the porch. Richard's Mercedes idled in the driveway, a dark reminder of the world she came from. Each step down the worn wooden stairs felt like lead in her legs. Back in the farmhouse, the first rays of sunrise crept through windows, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. James wandered down, still groggy, reaching automatically for the coffee pot. His hand froze mid-air when he spotted the note. "No," he breathed, scanning the words. "No, no, no." Footsteps thundered on the stairs as Emily rushed down in her pajamas, her face bright with morning cheer. "Is Claire making pancakes again?" "I thought I heard—" She stopped short at her father's expression. James clutched the note, his knuckles white. "She's gone, sweetheart." "Gone?" Emily's voice cracked. But she can't be." She snatched the note from her father's hands, reading it over and over as if the words might change. She promised she wouldn't leave us." James pulled his daughter close as her body began to shake with sobs. "I know, baby. I know it hurts." "Why does everyone leave?" Emily cried into his shirt. "First Mom, and now Claire. It's not fair." James stroked her hair, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "Sometimes people leave because they think they're protecting us. But we have to trust that God has a plan, even when we don't understand it." "I don't want God's plan. I want Claire back." Emily's words dissolved into heartbroken weeping. James held her tighter, rocking slightly like he used to when she was small. "I know, sweetheart. I want her back too." He looked around the kitchen, seeing all the empty spaces where Claire should be, her coffee cup by the sink, her reading glasses on the windowsill, her presence that had filled their home with new life. "She loves us, Dad," Emily hiccuped between sobs. "I know she does. I saw it in her eyes yesterday when we were all dancing." "Yes, she does," James agreed softly. "That's why she left, to protect us from whatever Richard threatened." Emily pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Then why are we letting her face him alone? You always say we don't abandon family when times get tough." James looked down at his daughter's tear-stained face, seeing her mother's strength shining through. "You're right. We don't abandon family." He squared his shoulders. "But right now, we need to trust that Claire knows what she's doing. We need to pray for her, and believe that God will bring her back to us, if that's His plan." Meanwhile, Claire sat rigid in Richard's car as it sped toward the city, each mile taking her further from the only real home she'd ever known. The countryside blurred past her window. Golden fields, weathered barns, the simple beauty she'd learned to love. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. Richard spoke beside her, laying out his plans for the company takeover, but his words washed over her like static. All she could hear was Emily's laughter, James's deep voice saying her name with such tenderness. The rising sun caught her engagement ring, the one Richard had given her years ago, now feeling like a shackle rather than a promise. She'd found it in her suit pocket this morning, a symbol of the life she was being forced back into. But her heart remained behind, in a farmhouse kitchen, where love flowed as freely as morning coffee, where a father and daughter had taught her the true meaning of family. The Mercedes curved around another bend, and the last glimpse of James's farm disappeared from view. Claire closed her eyes, holding tight to the memory of their final evening together. James's arms around her as they danced, Emily's delighted giggle as she twirled between them, the feeling that she'd finally found where she belonged. A tear slid down her cheek, falling onto her clasped hands. She had to believe leaving was the right choice, the only way to keep them safe. But as the car carried her back to her old life, Claire had never felt more lost. 3 days after Claire's departure, Emily stood at the kitchen window, her small hands pressed against the glass. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farmyard, where the chickens pecked lazily at scattered feed. She watched as her father trudged through his morning chores, his shoulders heavier than usual. "Dad?" Emily's voice wavered. "Do you think she'll come back?" James paused in the doorway, his work boots leaving traces of mud on the welcome mat. The same mat where Claire had first stood, drenched and lost, just weeks ago. He removed his cap and ran a hand through his graying hair. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "people need time to figure things out, to find their way back to what matters." Emily turned from the window, her eyes glistening. "But she belongs here, with us." Her voice cracked on the last word. James crossed the kitchen and wrapped his arms around his daughter. She buried her face in his worn flannel shirt, just like she had after her mother passed. "I miss her too, sweetheart," he whispered, his own heart aching. "We just have to trust that love finds its way. That's what your mama always said, remember?" Emily nodded against his chest. "But what if Claire's too scared to find her way back?" James swallowed hard, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Then we pray, and we keep loving her anyway." The kitchen felt emptier now. No more sounds of Claire's laughter mixing with Emily's as they attempted to bake cookies. No more quiet conversations over coffee while watching the sunrise. Even the chair where Claire had sat remained untouched, as if preserving her memory. 40 miles away, in her luxurious penthouse apartment, Claire Whitmore sat alone in her home office. The space that once represented power and success now felt like a prison. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city skyline, but she barely noticed it anymore. Her desk was covered with newspapers, all carrying stories about her redemption at the town hall press conference. In every photo, James and Emily stood beside her, their presence giving her strength she never knew she needed. Claire picked up her phone for the 100th time, scrolling through messages from board members and lawyers. But the only message she wanted to see was from the small family she'd left behind, the family she'd chosen to protect by walking away. The silence in her apartment was deafening. No roosters crowing at dawn, no sound of James's truck rumbling up the driveway, no Emily calling out, "Claire, come look at this," with endless enthusiasm. Her assistant had arranged for all her clothes to be retrieved from the farmhouse. They hung now in her massive closet, designer labels pristine. But mixed among them was a simple flannel shirt James had lent her, the one she'd worn while helping him fix the barn door. She touched it gently, remembering how he'd shown her how to hold a hammer properly, his hands warm and sure over hers. Claire walked to her desk and opened the drawer. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, a crayon drawing Emily had made just days before everything fell apart. 3 stick figures stood holding hands in front of a red barn. My dad, me, and Claire, written above them in careful children's handwriting. A bright yellow sun smiled down on them from the corner of the page. Her fingers trembled as she traced the simple lines. In Emily's innocent art, they were already a family. The 3 of them together, complete. Happy. "I can't lose them," Claire whispered to the empty room, her voice breaking on each word. Memories flooded back. Emily's fierce hugs, James's gentle strength, quiet evenings on the porch watching fireflies dance. The way James looked at her, like she was more than her wealth or mistakes. The way Emily's faith in her made her want to be better. She glanced at the legal documents scattered across her desk. Richard's threats wrapped in corporate jargon. He'd promised to leave James and Emily alone if she stayed away, if she played by his rules. But sitting here in her expensive cage, Claire realized she'd already lost everything that mattered. James's words from that first night echoed in her mind. "We don't turn away people in need." He'd offered shelter to a stranger in a storm, asking nothing in return. Now, in her own storm, she'd turned away from the very people who had shown her what real love looked like. In her lap, Emily's drawing seemed to glow with possibility. 3 stick figures, holding hands, facing whatever came together. Claire touched the paper gently, a tear falling onto the corner where Emily had drawn a heart around all of them. "I can't lose them," she whispered again, but this time her voice held something new, something that felt like hope. Claire stood in her penthouse bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her designer suit felt like armor, but not the kind that protected, the kind that imprisoned. She adjusted her pearl necklace, the one she'd worn to countless meetings, and remembered James's calloused hands fixing a broken fence post. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go," he had told her that day, showing her how to release a stuck nail without breaking the wood. Her phone buzzed. Messages from Richard flooded the screen, demanding she arrive early to discuss terms. She deleted them all. In her walk-in closet, Claire's hand brushed past rows of power suits until it found a simple blue dress, the one she'd bought at the small-town boutique with Emily. She held it close, breathing in the faint scent of lavender from the farmhouse laundry. Making her decision, she slipped it on instead of the suit. The elevator ride to the top floor of Whitmore Industries felt longer than usual. Claire watched the numbers climb, remembering Emily's words about math homework. "Sometimes the hardest problems have the simplest answers." She smiled, touching the manila envelope in her bag that contained those simple answers. The boardroom doors opened to reveal 20 faces turned expectantly toward her. Richard sat at the head of the table, her seat, his smile oily and triumphant. The morning sun through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast harsh shadows across the mahogany table. "Claire, darling," Richard stood, spreading his arms. "So good of you to join us. I trust you've come to your senses?" She took her time, walking to the middle of the room, not to the chair Richard had left empty beside him. The board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. These were people she'd worked with for years, people who'd betrayed her for promises of power and profit. "I have come to my senses," Claire said, her voice clear and steady. "But probably not in the way you expected." Richard's smile faltered. "Now, Claire, remember our discussion about your farmer friend and his charming daughter? Wouldn't want any unnecessary complications in their lives." Claire opened her bag and withdrew the envelope. "You know, Richard, I learned something important recently. About the difference between power and strength." She began distributing documents to each board member. "Power is what you grab. Strength is what you give." The room filled with rustling paper and sharp intakes of breath. Richard snatched a copy, his face reddening as he read. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You can't do this." "I already have," Claire said. "As of this morning, I've transferred my controlling shares of Whitmore Industries to the New Hope Children's Foundation. They'll ensure this company returns to its original mission of ethical innovation and community service." One of the board members, Agnes Turner, spoke up. "But that's billions in assets." "Yes," Claire nodded. "And attached, you'll find documented evidence of the illegal practices some of you have been hiding. Tax evasion, insider trading, environmental violations." Her eyes met Richard's. "And proof of conspiracy to stage a hostile takeover." The room erupted in chaos. Richard jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure—" "You'll what?" Claire's voice cut through the noise. "Threaten me with the truth? For the first time in years, I'm not afraid of that anymore." She turned to address the whole room. I've already sent copies to the SEC and major news outlets, but I'm also offering you a choice. She placed another stack of papers on the table. These are resignation letters. Sign them, return the stolen funds, and the foundation's lawyers won't press charges. Richard lunged for her, but 2 board members held him back. Others were already reaching for the resignation letters, faces pale. "You're making a mistake," Richard hissed. "You're nothing without this company." Claire smiled, thinking of warm kitchen mornings and the sound of Emily's laughter. "No, Richard, I was nothing with it." She walked to the doors, pausing only to say, "The Foundation's representatives will be here within the hour. I suggest you all make your decisions quickly." The elevator ride down was lighter than the one up. Claire watched her reflection in the polished doors. A woman in a simple blue dress, standing straight and tall. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her smile was real. In the marble lobby, she stopped at the security desk and handed over her access cards. "I won't be needing these anymore, Frank." The elderly guard who'd greeted her every morning for 15 years stood and tipped his hat. "Take care of yourself, Ms. Whitmore." "Claire," she corrected gently. "Just Claire." She stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, looking up at the towering skyscraper that had been her life's work. The morning sun caught the glass windows, making them shine like 1,000 mirrors. But Claire didn't see her reflection anymore. She saw possibility. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb. The driver rolled down his window. "Where to, miss?" Claire wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her smile growing wider. For the first time in decades, she felt truly, completely free. Thunder rolled across the darkening sky as Claire's rental car wound through the familiar country roads. Rain pelted the windshield, heavy and relentless, just like that first night when James had found her. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, but this time, not from fear, from hope. The wipers swept back and forth in a steady rhythm as memories washed over her. Emily's laughter in the kitchen, James's quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Simple moments that had filled the hollow spaces in her heart. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cornfields on either side of the road. Claire barely noticed she was crying, tears mixing with the sound of rain. She'd left her designer suits behind, wearing only jeans and a simple blouse, clothes she'd bought in town with Emily weeks ago. The old maple tree came into view, its branches swaying in the storm. Then, the familiar white farmhouse emerged through the curtain of rain, windows glowing warm and inviting. Claire's heart lurched at the sight of James's truck in the driveway, exactly where it always parked. She pulled up slowly, cutting the engine. For a moment, she sat perfectly still, listening to the rain drum against the car roof. The porch light was on. James always left it burning, a habit he'd explained was for Emily's comfort. "So she always knows she's home," he'd said. Through the downpour, Claire could make out the kitchen window. A figure moved inside. Emily, setting the table for dinner. The sight made Claire's chest ache with longing. This was what she'd walked away from, thinking she was protecting them. But in trying to shield them from her world, she'd only managed to break all their hearts, including her own. Taking a deep breath, Claire opened the car door and stepped out into the storm. The rain immediately soaked through her clothes, plastering her hair to her face. But she didn't run for cover. Instead, she stood there, letting the rain wash over her like a baptism. She was done running. Motion caught her eye. Emily had spotted her through the window. Claire watched as the girl's face transformed from confusion to recognition to pure joy. Emily disappeared from view, and seconds later, the screen door burst open with a bang. "Claire!" Emily's voice carried over the storm as she bounded down the porch steps, heedless of the rain. "Claire, you came back!" Claire's vision blurred with tears as Emily ran toward her. Without hesitation, Claire dropped to her knees in the muddy driveway, arms opening wide. Emily crashed into her embrace with such force it nearly knocked them both over. "I'm so sorry," Claire whispered, holding Emily tight. The girl was trembling. Or maybe that was Claire herself. "I'm so sorry I left." Emily pulled back just enough to look at Claire's face, rain streaming down both their cheeks. "Are you staying?" she asked, voice small and hopeful. "Please say you're staying." Claire cupped Emily's face in her hands, mud smearing her cheek but neither of them caring. Her heart felt so full it might burst. This was it. This was everything that mattered. Not boardrooms or billion-dollar deals or power plays. Just this. Just love. "If you'll have me," Claire said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm home." Emily let out a sob and threw her arms around Claire's neck again. They knelt there in the mud and rain, holding each other as the storm raged around them. Claire buried her face in Emily's hair, breathing in the scent of home, of belonging, of family, of love. Lightning flashed again, closer now, illuminating the scene in stark white. There, in the doorway, stood James, watching them with an expression that made Claire's heart stutter. But this time, she wouldn't run. This time, she was exactly where she needed to be. James stood frozen on the weathered porch, his heart pounding as he watched Emily race across the muddy yard toward Claire. The rain came down in sheets now, turning the world into a blur of gray, but he could see them clearly, his daughter wrapped in Claire's desperate embrace as they both knelt in the wet grass. Thunder rumbled overhead, but it couldn't mask the sound of their mingled crying. Claire's elegant clothes were already soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She held Emily as if she'd never let go again, rocking slightly back and forth. James's fingers gripped the porch railing. Part of him wanted to run to them, while another part remained rooted in place, protecting his heart. He'd spent the past week trying to be strong for Emily, hiding his own pain behind quiet smiles and gentle reassurances. But seeing Claire now, seeing her choose them over everything else, cracked something open inside him. "I'm so sorry." Claire's voice carried through the rain as she pulled back just enough to look at Emily's face. "I'm so sorry I left you, sweetheart. I thought I was protecting you both, but I was wrong. I was so wrong." Emily wiped at her eyes, rain and tears mixing on her cheeks. "You won't leave again?" The question came out small and uncertain, reminding James of when she'd lost her mother, that same fear of abandonment in her voice. "Never," Claire promised, brushing Emily's wet hair from her face with trembling fingers. "I gave it all away, the company, the money, everything that didn't matter. Because this," she gestured between them, including James in her gaze. "This is what matters. You and your father are what matter." James felt his breath catch as their eyes met across the yard. Claire slowly rose to her feet, keeping one arm around Emily's shoulders. Her designer dress was ruined, mud staining the hem, but she'd never looked more beautiful to him than in this moment of raw honesty. "James," she said, her voice breaking, "I need to explain." He finally found his feet, stepping down from the porch into the rain. Emily glanced between them, then squeezed Claire's hand before stepping back, giving them space. Claire took a shaky breath. "Richard threatened to destroy you both. He had lawyers ready to drag you through endless litigation, to expose Emily to the media. He said he'd make your life hell unless I walked away from the company." She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "I thought leaving would keep you safe. I thought I was being strong, but I was just being a coward." "What changed?" James asked softly, taking one step closer. "Everything." Claire smiled through her tears. "I realized I was still letting fear control me, still letting others dictate my choices. But you taught me about real strength, James. You and Emily showed me what really matters. Not power or money or reputation, but love and integrity and faith." She took a trembling breath. "So I went to the board meeting today and I gave it all away. I donated my controlling shares to a children's foundation. I exposed Richard's corruption and walked away. I'm not rich anymore. I'm not powerful." She faltered, vulnerability clear in her eyes. "I'm just me. And I'm hoping that's enough, because I love you both so much it hurts." James closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "It was always enough," he said hoarsely. "You were always enough, Claire. The money never mattered to us." He opened his arms, and she fell into them with a sob, clinging to him as if he were a lifeline. Her body shook against his as he held her close, one hand cradling the back of her head. The rain continued to pour, but neither of them noticed or cared. "I love you," Claire whispered against his chest. "I love our family. Please say you can forgive me." James tilted her chin up with gentle fingers. "There's nothing to forgive," he said softly. "You came back. That's all that matters." He lowered his head and kissed her, pouring all his love and forgiveness into the gesture. Claire rose on her tiptoes to meet him, her arms sliding around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal passion. The rain fell around them like a curtain, washing away the past and blessing their new beginning. Emily's delighted giggle broke through their moment. They turned to find her watching them with shining eyes and the biggest smile they'd seen in days. Without hesitation, Claire and James opened their arms, and Emily ran to join their embrace. The three of them stood together in the rain, holding each other close, finally whole. Thunder rumbled again overhead, but this time it felt like applause. Sunlight streamed through the farmhouse kitchen windows, casting warm squares of gold across the worn wooden floor. The storm from the previous night had cleared, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent that drifted in through the slightly opened window. The morning air hummed with possibility. Claire stood at the kitchen counter, her designer clothes replaced by borrowed jeans and one of James's old flannel shirts rolled up at the sleeves. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and a light dusting of flour decorated her cheek. Emily bounced beside her, holding a large mixing bowl while Claire measured ingredients. No, you have to add the vanilla before the milk," Emily instructed, giggling as Claire deliberately made a show of reaching for the wrong ingredient. "You're doing it wrong on purpose." "Am I?" Claire's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I thought running a billion-dollar company meant I knew everything. Not about pancakes." Emily bumped her hip playfully against Claire's side, making them both laugh. James leaned against the doorframe, watching them with quiet joy. The scene before him seemed almost unreal, like a dream he'd been afraid to wish for since losing his wife. The morning sun caught Claire's profile, and his breath caught at how naturally she fit into his kitchen, into their lives. "Dad," Emily called out, spotting him, "come help. Claire keeps messing up the recipe." "I prefer to think of it as creative experimentation," Claire defended, whisking the batter with exaggerated concentration. James crossed the kitchen, picking up a dish towel to wipe the flour from Claire's cheek. "Creative experimentation, huh? Is that what they teach in business school?" "Among other things," Claire replied softly, leaning into his touch for a moment. "Though I'm finding out there's a lot they didn't teach that matters more." Emily carefully poured the first dollop of batter onto the heated griddle. "Like what?" Claire set down the whisk, her expression growing thoughtful. "Like how the sound of rain on a tin roof is better than any luxury hotel suite, or how making pancakes with people you love beats any five-star restaurant." James started coffee brewing while Emily watched the pancake bubbles with intense focus. The kitchen filled with morning sounds, the sizzle of batter, the gentle drip of coffee, the clinking of plates as Claire set the table. "You know," Claire continued, her voice carrying a weight of revelation, "I spent decades building an empire. Private jets, penthouses, board meetings, where my word could make or break million-dollar deals." She shook her head, smiling at the memory. "And none of it, not one single bit, made me feel as rich as I do right now, in this kitchen, with flour on my clothes and people who actually see me." Emily flipped the pancake with a flourish, revealing a perfectly golden-brown surface. "Did you like being rich?" "I thought I did," Claire admitted, passing plates to James. "But I think I was just afraid of being poor, not just in money, but in spirit, in love." She looked at James, her eyes soft with emotion. "I had everything and nothing at the same time." James set down the coffee pot, moving to stand beside her. "And now?" "Now?" Claire gestured to the humble kitchen, to Emily's proud grin as she slid the first pancake onto a waiting plate, to the morning sun painting everything in honey gold light. "Now I have what matters. Faith that guided me back here. A community that judged me by my heart, not my bank account. And," she swallowed hard, "if you'll have me, a chance at real love, the kind that's worth more than any fortune." James took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. You know, when Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. Thought my heart was closed up shop." He squeezed her hand gently. "But God has a way of surprising us, doesn't he?" "He really does," Claire whispered, her free hand reaching out to ruffle Emily's hair as the girl proudly presented another perfect pancake. They settled around the table, passing syrup and butter, their movements already falling into comfortable familiarity. The pancakes might have been slightly misshapen, but they tasted better than any gourmet breakfast Claire could remember. "You know what this means?" Emily asked, cutting her pancake into careful triangles. "What's that, sweetheart?" James asked. Emily looked up, her face glowing with joy and certainty. "We're a real family now." Claire's fork clattered against her plate, and her eyes welled up with tears. Happy ones this time. James reached across the table to take her hand again, and Emily beamed at them both. The morning sun continued to pour through the windows, warming the kitchen filled with the scent of coffee, pancakes, and new beginnings. Outside, birds sang in the apple trees, and somewhere in the distance, a tractor hummed to life, ready for another day's honest work. Inside, 3 hearts beat, in perfect synchronization, bound together by something far more precious than gold. The simple, profound miracle of belonging. The Sunday morning sun painted golden streaks across the church's stained glass windows as James's old pickup truck rumbled into the parking lot. Claire smoothed her simple blue dress, so different from her usual designer suits, and took a deep breath. Emily squeezed her hand from the back seat, offering a reassuring smile. "Ready?" James asked softly, his weathered hand finding hers. Claire nodded, though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. This would be her first public appearance since returning to the farmhouse, since choosing love over empire. They walked up the church steps together, Emily between them. The white clapboard building stood proud against the clear autumn sky, its bell tower reaching toward heaven. As James pulled open the heavy wooden door, the familiar sounds of hymns and quiet chatter drifted out. The conversations hushed as they entered. Claire felt dozens of eyes turn their way. Some curious, others uncertain. She resisted the urge to shrink back, remembering James's words from that morning, "Just be yourself, the real you." Pastor Daniel stood at the entrance, his kind face creasing into a warm smile. "Welcome home," he said, taking Claire's hands in his. "We've been praying for you." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes. Such simple words, yet they touched something deep within her. Emily beamed up at the pastor, practically bouncing with joy. They made their way to James's usual pew, 3rd row from the front. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the local diner, turned around and patted Claire's knee. "So good to have you back, dear. We've missed your help at the food pantry." More whispers rippled through the congregation, but these were different from the suspicious murmurs of before. These carried warmth, acceptance. Claire caught fragments. "So brave of her," and "gave up everything for love." The organ music swelled, and the congregation rose for the opening hymn. Claire stood between James and Emily, their voices joining the familiar melody of Amazing Grace. She'd heard this hymn countless times before, but now the words about being lost and found struck her heart with new meaning. Pastor Daniel stepped to the pulpit, his gentle voice filling the church. "Today's sermon is about renewal," he began, his eyes meeting Claire's. "About how God's love can transform us, if we're brave enough to accept it. Sometimes, that transformation means letting go of who we thought we were, to become who we're meant to be." Claire felt James's hand find hers again, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Emily leaned against her other side, and Claire wrapped her arm around the girl's shoulders. The pastor continued, weaving a message about community and acceptance. He spoke of how true strength often means choosing love over power, and how real wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. Though he never mentioned Claire by name, his words wrapped around her story like a warm embrace. After the service, people lingered in the churchyard, gathering in small groups under the shade of old maple trees. Usually, Claire would have felt anxious in such a setting, surrounded by people who knew her story. But something had shifted. Sarah Miller, who taught at Emily's school, approached with a plate of cookies. "These are for you," she said, smiling. "Welcome to our church family, officially this time." Tom Wilson, the hardware store owner who'd employed James for extra income during tough times, came forward with his wife. "We're having a barbecue next Saturday," he said. "Nothing fancy, just neighbors getting together. We'd love to have all three of you come." One by one, the townspeople approached. Some offered hugs. Others shared simple words of welcome. Each interaction chipped away at the walls Claire had built around her heart during her years in the corporate world. Mrs. Jenkins, elderly but sharp as ever, took Claire's hands in hers. "You know," she said, her voice wavering with age but firm with conviction, "I've lived here 78 years, seen lots of folks come and go, but I've never seen James and Emily as happy as they are with you here." Claire swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she managed. Emily tugged at her dress. "See?" she whispered. "I told you everyone would love you once they knew the real you." James stood nearby, watching with quiet joy as Claire was embraced by the community. His eyes held a tenderness that made Claire's heart swell. Pastor Daniel approached one last time, carrying a small wrapped package. "This is from the congregation," he said, handing it to Claire. "A welcome gift." Claire carefully unwrapped it to find a leather-bound Bible, her name embossed in gold on the cover. Inside, members of the congregation had written messages of encouragement and welcome. "You're part of us now," Pastor Daniel said simply, standing there in the dappled sunlight, surrounded by genuine smiles and open hearts. Claire felt something she'd searched for all her life, but never found in boardrooms or luxury penthouses. She felt the warm, encompassing sensation of belonging, not because of her achievements or status, but simply because of who she was. Emily's arms wrapped around her waist, and James's steady presence anchored her. The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and late summer flowers, and in that moment, Claire knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The congregation's warmth wrapped around her like a quilt stitched with acceptance and understanding. For the first time since she could remember, Claire felt truly, completely embraced. Not as Claire Whitmore, former CEO, but simply as Claire, a woman who had found her way home. The spring morning buzzed with promise as James, Claire, and Emily stood at the edge of the freshly tilled garden plot behind the farmhouse. The rich soil stretched before them like a blank canvas ready for new life. Claire had traded her once familiar business attire for worn jeans and one of James's old flannel shirts rolled up at the sleeves. "First, we need to mark out the rows," James explained, holding wooden stakes and twine. His eyes crinkled with amusement as he watched Claire examine the garden tools spread out on an old blanket nearby. "Never thought I'd see a CEO getting excited about tomato plants." Claire picked up a trowel, testing its weight in her hand. There's something beautiful about creating something with your own hands. In the boardroom, everything was abstract. Numbers, projections, deals. "This is real." Emily bounced between them, clutching seed packets to her chest. "Can I plant the strawberries, please?" Her enthusiasm made both adults laugh. "Of course, sweetheart," James said, ruffling her hair. "But remember what we talked about. They need special care. Like everything worth growing," Claire added softly, meeting James's gaze. They worked together under the warming sun, James demonstrating how to dig the holes at just the right depth. Emily carefully measured the spaces between plants, using a ruler she'd brought from her school supplies, her tongue poking out in concentration. "See how the roots need room to spread?" James showed Claire, holding up a young tomato plant. "They're like people that way, need space to grow, but also need support." He gestured to the wooden stakes they'd put in place. Claire nodded, gently placing her own plant into the soil. "I spent so many years thinking strength meant standing completely alone. I was wrong." She patted the earth around the seedling with careful hands. "Real strength is knowing when to lean on others." Emily worked her way down the strawberry row, singing quietly to each plant as she tucked them in. "They'll grow better if we encourage them," she explained, matter-of-factly, when Claire raised an eyebrow. "She might be onto something there," James chuckled. "Faith and love have a way of making things flourish." They moved methodically across the plot, planting peppers, cucumbers, and herbs. Claire found herself mesmerized by the rhythm of it. The digging, placing, covering. So different from the frantic pace of her old life, yet somehow more fulfilling. "I never understood the appeal of getting my hands dirty," Claire admitted, showing Emily how to properly support a young pepper plant. "Now I can't imagine not having earth under my fingernails." James paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow with his forearm. "It's honest work. Reminds us we're part of something bigger than ourselves." He looked around at their morning's progress. "This garden will feed us, but it'll also feed others. We'll share with the church pantry, neighbors in need. Like how God's love grows when we share it," Emily piped up, repeating something she'd heard in Sunday school. Claire felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "You're both teaching me so much about what really matters." They worked their way through the morning, talking about plans for the summer, church picnics, county fairs, maybe even a family vacation. Simple dreams, but precious ones. Claire found herself sharing ideas about expanding the garden next year, perhaps adding a greenhouse. "Listen to you," James teased gently. "Already planning for the future." Claire's hands stilled in the soil. "Is that okay? Me thinking that far ahead?" James put down his tools and moved closer to her. "More than okay. This is your home now, Claire. Your future is here, with us, if that's what you want." Emily bounced up from her row of strawberries. "Of course it is. We're family now." Claire blinked back happy tears. "Yes, we are. And I've never been more grateful for anything in my life." The sun climbed higher as they finished the last row. Claire stood back, surveying their work with satisfaction. The neat lines of plants stretched across the dark soil, like promises waiting to be kept. "Now comes the fun part," James said, reaching for the watering can. "Everything needs a good drink to get started." They took turns watering, Emily giggling as she sometimes missed the plants entirely. The water sparkled in the sunlight, creating tiny rainbows above the freshly planted garden. "This feels like a blessing," Claire said quietly. "All of it. The garden, this farm, you two. Like God had a plan all along, even when I was lost in the rain that first night." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. He has a way of planting seeds of hope just when we need them most. A playful splash of water hit Claire's arm as Emily accidentally swung the watering can too wide. Claire laughed, the sound free and light in the spring air. James stepped closer to help Claire up from where she'd been kneeling. She noticed a smudge of dirt across his cheek and reached up instinctively. Their eyes met as she gently wiped it away, her touch lingering. "Missed a spot?" she murmured, her heart full as she looked at him. Then at Emily, the three of them together in the sunshine, drenched garden they'd planted as a family. The autumn sun streamed through the church's stained glass windows, casting warm colors across the bustling food pantry. Claire stood behind the serving counter, ladling hot stew into bowls with practiced ease. Her designer clothes and corporate suits were long forgotten, replaced by a simple apron and comfortable jeans. The transformation went far deeper than her wardrobe. Her eyes sparkled with genuine warmth as she greeted each person by name. "More carrots in yours, right, Mrs. Henderson?" Claire asked the elderly woman, who approached with a shy smile. The woman nodded, clearly touched that Claire remembered her preference. James worked alongside her, cutting fresh bread and arranging it in baskets. Every so often his gaze would drift to Claire, and his heart would swell with pride. She had found her true calling here, among the people, serving with genuine care and humility. Emily darted between tables, refilling water glasses and chatting with the regulars. At 13, she had blossomed into a natural helper, following both her father's and Claire's example of service. Her ponytail bounced as she moved, her laughter mixing with the gentle hum of conversation that filled the room. "We're running low on bread," James announced, checking their supplies. "Already?" Claire wiped her hands on her apron. "Good thing I arranged for extra deliveries starting next week." She had quietly established a partnership between her charitable foundation and local bakeries, ensuring the pantry would never run short of fresh bread. A young mother struggled through the door with 2 small children. Claire immediately noticed her distress and motioned to Emily, who hurried over to help with the babies while their mother got settled. The scene touched James deeply. watching his daughter and Claire work in such natural harmony, their hearts aligned in service. The winter coat drive starts next week, Claire mentioned to James as she prepared more bowls. The foundation's matching all donations, but I made sure it's done through the church so no one feels uncomfortable. Her way of giving had changed dramatically. No press releases, no grand gestures, just quiet support that empowered the community to help itself. Pastor Mike stopped by their station, beaming at the three of them. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, patting James on the shoulder. "Who would have thought that stormy night would lead to all this?" Claire blushed slightly, remembering the broken woman she'd been, standing in the rain. James reached over and squeezed her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. The simple gesture spoke volumes about their journey together. "Miss Claire," called out Mr. Wilson, a regular at the pantry, "my granddaughter got that scholarship you told us about. She starts community college next month." His eyes glistened with grateful tears. Claire's foundation had established a local education fund, but she'd insisted it be administered through the town council rather than bearing her name. "That's wonderful news," she replied warmly. She worked hard for it. Emily returned to their serving station, her face glowing with purpose. She watched as Claire continued to serve, noting how each person received not just food, but dignity and respect. The young girl's heart swelled with love for this woman who had become such an essential part of their family. The afternoon light began to soften, casting long shadows through the windows as the crowd thinned. Claire, James, and Emily worked together to clean up, their movements synchronized from months of shared routine. They could hear the choir practicing in the sanctuary, their hymns floating through the halls. "Remember when you tried to teach me to make biscuits?" Claire chuckled as she wiped down the counters. "I nearly burned down the kitchen." James laughed, the sound rich and full. "Now look at you, feeding half the county with store-bought bread," Claire admitted with a grin. "Some things are best left to the professionals." Emily gathered the last of the empty plates, stacking them carefully. Her face grew thoughtful as she watched Claire and her father work side by side, their love evident in every small interaction. Something about the moment struck her deeply. "Mom would be proud," Emily said suddenly, her voice soft but clear. James and Claire both stopped what they were doing, touched by the weight of Emily's words. James reached for Claire's hand, squeezing it gently. The three of them stood together in the quiet of the pantry, surrounded by the evidence of their shared purpose and love. James squeezed Claire's hand, his eyes shining with emotion. In that simple gesture lay all the confirmation they needed. They had found their way home. The farmhouse glowed like a warm beacon against the darkening sky. Inside, golden firelight danced across the living room walls as thunder rolled in the distance. James added another log to the crackling flames, while Emily arranged thick quilts on the floor. Claire emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of steaming mugs, the rich scent of hot cocoa filling the air. "Perfect timing," James said softly, taking 2 mugs from the tray. "Sounds like another storm's brewing." Emily settled onto the floor, wrapping herself in her favorite quilt, the one her grandmother had made years ago. "Remember the night you found Claire, Dad? It was storming just like this." Claire handed Emily her cocoa, complete with tiny marshmallows floating on top. "That feels like a lifetime ago," she said, sinking into the worn armchair beside James. Her fingers curled around her own mug, savoring its warmth. James gazed into the flames, his expression thoughtful. "I almost drove past that night," he admitted. "But something told me to stop. God works in mysterious ways." "I was so lost," Claire whispered, her voice catching slightly. "Standing there in the rain, everything I thought mattered had crumbled away. My company, my reputation, my whole life." She paused, looking around the cozy room with wonder in her eyes. "I never imagined I'd find something so much better." Emily scooted closer to Claire's feet, leaning against her legs. "I'm glad you stayed," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of months of shared laughter, tears, and growing love. James reached over and took Claire's free hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "You know what I remember most about that night? Not the storm, not even finding you. It was watching Emily offer you breakfast the next morning, without hesitation or judgment, just pure kindness. Claire squeezed his hand, her eyes growing misty. That was the first moment I felt human again, not just a headline or a CEO, just me. The fire popped and crackled, casting shadows that danced across their faces. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, but inside, the warmth seemed to grow stronger. I used to think success meant corner offices and board meetings, Claire continued, running her fingers through Emily's hair. But real success is this: being part of a family, serving others at the church pantry, knowing your neighbors' names and stories, and making the best chocolate chip cookies in town, Emily added with a grin, making them all laugh. James set his mug down and leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. You know what I see when I look at us now? God's grace, taking 3 broken hearts and making something beautiful. Thunder rumbled again, but it seemed more distant now. Claire looked at James, her eyes full of peaceful certainty. I've spent my whole life chasing things: success, power, recognition, always running toward something or away from something. But here, with you both, I've finally found what peace feels like. Emily sat up and held out her hands. Group hug? She suggested, her face hopeful. They joined hands, forming a circle in front of the fire. The storm outside began to fade, its fury giving way to a gentle rain. James squeezed both their hands, his voice thick with emotion. From that first stormy night to this moment right here, every step led us home. Claire nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Home, she repeated softly. I never really knew what that word meant until now. The fire crackled softly, its warm light embracing their little circle. Through the windows, the clouds began to part, revealing hints of stars. Their hands remained linked, 3 hearts bound together by love, faith, and the simple miracle of finding each other on a stormy night. Emily rested her head against Claire's shoulder, while James drew them both closer. In the gentle quiet, they listened to the fading rain and the pop of burning logs, each grateful for the strange and wonderful path that had brought them together. The storm that had once threatened to destroy Claire's life had instead led her to the greatest gift of all, a family bound by choice, faith, and unconditional love. Their hands remained clasped as the last rumble of thunder faded away, leaving only the peaceful sound of their breathing and the quiet crackle of the fire. In that moment they were complete, father, daughter, and the woman who had stumbled into their lives on a rainy night, now bound together in the warm certainty of belonging. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of James Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please, don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.